If cosmopolitanism is so convincing, why don't we live in a cosmopolitan world? Why don't we have global egalitarianism? Why aren't people on the streets right now trying to make sure that everyone has an equal share of the fruits of socio-economic cooperation? This question frames the motivational critique of cosmopolitanism, which is what I'm going to look at in this video. But remember to like, subscribe, and share before we get into it. Cosmopolitanism has a problem, and that's a motivation problem. Now, when I first started reading about global distributive justice, back when I was a young kid in the early 2000s, I was sold. It made sense to me. Place of birth is arbitrary. Intense global economic cooperation creates circumstances of justice. It really clicked for me. But it didn't click for a lot of people. A lot of people don't feel a close tie to distant strangers. They don't feel that they should sacrifice their lifestyle to make life better for people that they're never going to meet, who they don't share a culture with, who they don't really have anything in common. They don't have solidarity. And this frames a really important objection to cosmopolitanism, the motivational critique. A big objection to cosmopolitanism is that it fails on a classic requirement of a theory of justice, that ought implies can. If we have a theory of justice, it needs to have principles that people are actually able to live up to. And a lot of critics of cosmopolitanism say it don't have them. It needs to be able to motivate action, and cosmopolitanism just can't do it. My friend and general cool guy, Lior Erez, has written an amazing account of the motivational critique of cosmopolitanism. He argues that we shouldn't get confused. We're not talking about a descriptive critique. We're not saying that there's no way that cosmopolitanism could motivate people. People get motivated by all sorts of things. People were motivated by the Heaven's Gate cult to commit suicide to get on a spaceship traveling behind the Hale-Bopp comet. People can be motivated to do a whole lot of weird things. What the real motivation critique is looking at whether the normative reasons provided by cosmopolitanism are sufficient to motivate action in the real world. The problem of normative feasibility is that if the costs of living up to principles of justice are too high, then people will not internalize them. They will not live up to them. They will not be persuaded by them. And we can see this in a lot of cosmopolitan critical literature. A lot of people have brought this line of criticism against Peter Singer. Now, Singer famously argues that we should give to the point of marginal utility to alleviate global poverty. So, like, the last penny I give will bring someone up to my level. That is too demanding. People are not going to sacrifice their family, their friends, their ability to live a marginally good life to help someone who they will never meet. It simply won't motivate them. This sounds a lot like what David Miller was saying in the video about illegal immigration, right? He says that the state has the right to control its borders. Well, one of the reasons it has this right is because creating circumstances of justice requires solidarity, that national solidarity that needs to be protected and fostered in order to achieve liberal goals, the goals of the welfare state, democracy, the rule of law. The argument put forward by Miller is that cosmopolitanism could not provide reasons that would motivate people in a debate. He says if we had a group of citizens together talking about theories of justice, they might be motivated by the nation, but they wouldn't be motivated by simple humanity. It's an argument that he says, well, we need ethics for earthlings. He thinks cosmopolitans are like people traveling around on the Starship Enterprise with their prime directive, which applies everywhere at all times, but is actually very thin, very anodyne, and doesn't actually describe the world in which we live. We need, as he says, we need political philosophy for earthlings. Now, my problem with this approach is that his understanding of earthlings is pretty constrained. He talks about people getting together and debating, but he's talking about people like me, who live in the global north, who are fairly well off, talking to other people like me, and a large portion of humanity is not included in this discussion about motivation for global distributive justice. They're simply set aside. He's saying that we should be having this debate, but we shouldn't be including everyone who is affected by it. It really does remind me, and I hate to say it, of the debates around slavery in the 19th century. If we traveled to the American states and we went down south, you'd find a lot of people who would sit down and give you a really strong justification why slavery was okay, because it's biblically justified by the sons of Ham, or because they have some awful eugenicist idea about the inferiority of races, or they just have this sort of idea that it's actually a benevolent institution that's far better than industrial capital, and shouldn't people be lucky to live in a slave society? Now, they honestly believed it, and they could get away with saying that this is an honest motivational belief because they weren't including the slaves in the conversation. Now, I think any conversation about the motivational critique needs to be thinking about the motivations of people living in severe poverty and experiencing severe inequality. Jürgen Habermas describes solidarity as the other side of the coin of justice. And if that's the case, then the literature on global distributive justice is highly imbalanced because we don't talk about solidarity that often. And when we talk about solidarity, we're often talking about it in a very isolated way, as we'll see. Now, solidarity actually might not be a great idea. One of the interesting critiques of solidarity comes from Jodi Dean, and she questions this idea of solidarity because often it's exclusionary, right? Think about the solidarity that Miller talks about, the national solidarity. Well, this necessarily means that there will be outsiders. There's always going to be an in-group and an out-group. There's always going to be exclusion. And people like Dean are quite skeptical of this thick idea of solidarity as a way of pushing people out. In response to this, Carol Gould has an idea of transnational network solidarity, which is decentralized, diffuse, but still can bring people together around a relatively universal but minimalistic idea of, say, global justice, focusing on human rights. Now, we might have different ideas about what this actually means in practice, but we share enough in common to push forward ideas for transnational institutions that can help protect human rights in the long term. And it's just about building this network of diffuse solidarity around the globe. I think there's a lot to recommend this idea of transnational network solidarity, but there are some issues with it because it seems to be writing about solidarity that can be generated by, people working in offices, in NGOs, probably in New York or London, and in sort of the upper middle classes in the global south. But it doesn't seem to apply to people who are living in actual circumstances of injustice. It's a little too, not to be too commie about it, a little too bourgeois. It's a little too middle class. I'm not saying Gould is wrong. I think her idea of transnational network solidarity is really relevant to building a cosmopolitan world. I'm skeptical as to whether it speaks to those who are most affected by oppression. Now, I like the solidarity that's expressed by Tommy Shelby in his book, We Who Are Dark. He's writing about anti-Black racism in America and how this is prevalent in American society, and that everyone who is racialized as Black is going to encounter it in their life, but they're going to encounter it in different ways. Someone who is working class in Alabama is going to experience anti-Black racism in a really different way than someone who is, say, went to Columbia, got a medical degree, and now has a practice in New England. It's going to be a different experience of anti-Black racism, but there is going to be an experience. And this experience creates a bond. This bond is the bond of solidarity under oppression. And it might be very pluralistic, but it brings people together. I think this form of solidarity is available to people living with extreme poverty and inequality. One of the things that I don't like about my videos and even my book is that I often talk about people living in extreme poverty as the global poor. And it's a big blanket term. Or I talk about the global south. It's so monolithic. But we have to remember, we're talking about individual people who live in very different communities, who experience inequality and poverty in very different ways. The experience of poverty might be very different in Colombia than it is in Cambodia, but it is still an experience of an overarching injustice. And this can build bridges between people, even if they have radically different life experiences in many other ways. The bond of oppression is a bond that produces solidarity. And this, I think, motivates transnational social movements as a vehicle for cosmopolitan ideas of justice driven by those who are oppressed by the current global system. And that's going to be the subject of the next video. Thanks for watching. Remember to like, subscribe, and share. And take care, everyone. Oh, what's this? It's just Dior, baby. It's just Dior. My sister bought this for me for $5 at Frenchie's about 15 years ago.